All right, so here we are, knee deep in the growth of industry chapter. The last thing that you should have in your notes is these few bullet points about the railroads. So let's double check. Open up our notes to this page. We're going to pick up kind of where we left off, talking about the railroads in terms of how the railroad industry became sort of the staple, the poster child for these massive industrial empires that were growing and developing in this time period after the Civil War. The railroads were as big as any other corporation at the time. And of course, one of the things that we learned was that these railroad companies become, in many ways, very corrupt, very abusive of their wealth and their power, and that becomes sort of a trend, a theme, just the way that these big businesses worked. So we're going to spend a little bit more time focusing in on that piece as we talk about Section 3, the growth of big business. So what we're going to do is I'm going to give you some general information to introduce this topic and this concept. And then at some point we're going to use two business leaders as examples of the hundreds of powerful, wealthy businesses and business leaders that sort of define this era. But let's just do some introductory stuff here. And let's talk a little bit about social Darwinism. New term for the day, social Darwinism. How many of you know what social Darwinism is, what that term means? How many of you know what the term Darwinism means? What is Darwinism? Anybody? If you know what Darwinism is, and I'll explain it in a second, then you'll understand this idea of social Darwinism, because what we'll do is we'll take this concept of what Darwin's theory was, and we're going to apply it to society. That's the social part. In more specific terms, we're going to apply it to the business world, the economic part of our society. So, social Darwinism essentially is derived from Darwin's theories about evolution. The ideas of how organisms evolve and survive. And one of the ways to sum up the concept is with the phrase, it basically is referring to the survival of the fittest. You think about the animal kingdom out there, and the king of the jungle, the lion is at the top of the food chain. I guess we're at the top of the food chain, right? Humans. And then you go down through all of these organisms in terms of where they stack up and where they fit in the jungle, I guess, we're going to use that analogy. And the strongest, most fit are the ones that can rise to the top of the food chain. That's why we humans are at the top, right? Well, we take that concept and that idea that Darwin proposed about the evolution of organisms, and now we're going to apply that to society, social issues. In this case, specifically, we're going to apply it to business and the economy. So social Darwinism sort of became the driving factor for how businesses were going to grow in the late 1800s. The common accepted belief was that society, in particular the government and rules and regulations, shouldn't interfere with this growth of industry. That businesses and labor and the economic system should be allowed to just grow and expand, and businesses and business leaders and companies and workers should be able to just fight it out. And if we do it this way and we don't put any rules and regulations and we allow the economic system to just kind of work under this system, then this is going to weed out the unfit or weaker businesses. And then that will let the strongest, most fit businesses sort of rise to the top. And if we do it that way, that's going to benefit everybody. It means that the strongest, best businesses will be the ones that are producing products, which means that the product should be the best products that they can produce. And that's going to create the best jobs and the best working environments and all that kind of stuff. So this social Darwinistic idea sort of drives how businesses will grow during this time period. Another term we use, an economic term, is laissez-faire, which is a French term that essentially loosely translates in English to hands off. So when you talk about laissez-faire economics, it's another way of saying the government should keep its hands off of the economic world. Just let it do its thing. Government should stay out of business. So the end result ultimately of this social Darwinistic approach to the economy is that it creates an environment where competition becomes the thing. And there is no time in American history where we see more competitive fighting between businesses and business leaders than during this time period that we're studying. We're going to learn a little bit about how these businesses competed with one another, how they fought with each other, how they tried to weed each other out, so to speak, how they tried to rise to the top of the jungle of the food chain. One of the examples is a term that you should be at least somewhat familiar with, and that is we'll see the creation of monopolies, but we'll learn some other terms. Monopoly is just a common one, and it's one that you're probably a little bit familiar with. Ultimately, these businesses were trying to create monopolies in their industries. The simplest way to explain that is to form a monopoly, you figure out ways to undersell your competitors, do everything you can do to compete with them so that you can eliminate all of your competition. Undersell them, buy them out, force them to shut down, whatever you have to do. And then, if you can eliminate all your competitors in whatever it is that you do in your business, then that means that you can control that business. And ultimately, it means that you can charge any price for the product that you are providing or the service that you're providing. So monopolizing an industry was just one of the ways that these businesses were trying to compete with each other. Again, we'll learn a little bit more about different strategies that were used as we continue through the chapter. All right, now I want to take just a few minutes to wrap this lecture up by talking about the individuals, the men. In this case, in the late 1800s, they were primarily all men who were the ones leading this social Darwinistic economic system, the men that were leading, creating and growing and competing with these big businesses. So we have two terms that we use to describe these different men that led these businesses. Interestingly enough, these two terms are polar opposites of each other, but they're actually, at the time, used to describe the same person. It just depends on the perspective that you had at the time of these men. Some were going to look at these leaders of businesses as being what we're going to call captains of industry, and I'll explain that in a second. Other people would look at the same business leader and they would say, oh, no, he's not a captain of industry, he's a robber baron. So let's figure out what these two terms mean and how they're different. Well, first of all, let's just think of the connotation. Here's a little English lesson here. Let's talk about the connotation of each of these words. You got captain of industry. It sounds like a superhero flying around with a cape, right? Versus a robber baron. It just sounds like kind of a snively, evil, kind of sneaky robber baron. Well, the connotation is basically just how those words sound. What do they make you think of? How do they make you feel when you hear them? One of them has a good connotation, this idea of a captain of industry. But the other, that robber baron, definitely has a bad connotation. And that's very purposeful because one of these terms, captain of industry, is used to describe these business leaders as great, wonderful people that did all kinds of great things for society. These are business leaders that built factories, that created jobs for the masses, that enabled the production of goods to grow so that we had things that we never dreamed of having before. These are men that founded and funded philanthropic ventures with all of the money that they made. Wow, there's a big word for the day. Philanthropic. Philanthropy it's when you take the money that you make, in this case that these business leaders made in their businesses, and then you use that money to give back to your community in some way, shape, or form. So these are the men that were the true captains of industry of the time. Now, some people looked at these same business leaders and they said, whoa, 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 they're not captains of industry. These aren't good guys. These guys are robber barons. These are not men that built factories and created jobs. These are business leaders that enslaved workers in the factories and treated them horribly. These are business leaders that did whatever they could to help themselves, even if it meant hurting what was best for everyone else. These are business leaders that destroyed natural resources, that corrupted our government, that had no concept of worrying about what other people were experiencing and were only concerned about themselves. These guys are bad, terrible men. They were corrupt, they were evil, they were harsh, they were powerful, they were wealthy, they were robber barons. Now again, depending on perspective, you may be using one of these terms, or two different people may be using each of these terms to describe the same exact person. One of the tasks that you're going to have as we meet a few of these captains of industry / robber barons is to decide on your own what you think. So eventually we will meet, we're going to meet at least two of them, and maybe along the way a few others, but we're going to take at least two of them and use them as examples. And when we learn about Andrew Carnegie and J.D. Rockefeller, names that we've already mentioned, we're going to use those as our examples. When we learn about these men, you're going to have to decide, what do you think? Were these men captains of industry, or were they robber barons? And so more to come on that, and that's going to be your task.